Hi everyone and welcome back to my vlog for Films About Painting Spring 2020. Today I will be discussing the documentary The Shock, which is by Hughes, and I'm going to be answering the question, what did America invent relative to the museum according to Hughes? How did this change the art collection approach of modern collectors? How did Alfred Barr contribute to this approach? How did this shape MoMA? How was this exemplified by the National Gallery? So I'm going to be talking about a lot of these. I'd like to focus on Alfred Barr just because I think he's very interesting. And let's get into it. To just start off giving a basic response to each question, because there are a couple of questions here. I'm just going to go off what I saw in the documentary, and then I'm going to go into a little bit more of the specifics, and I'm probably going to flash up a painting by Matisse, I think. We'll see. For what did America invent relative to the museum according to Hughes? Well, the answer is that they pretty much invented the notion, and this is from the documentary that I'm quoting it, that it could become the place where modernist credentials are sealed and stamped. And then also that, the beginning of the documentary talks about, like, locational art and how, like, there's art in the desert. It also talks about how a museum would even bother with advanced art, which I'm also quoting from the documentary. So pretty much what America was able to invent was a bigger audience and a bigger appreciation and respect of modernists, and show how modern art is the art of that era, and it is definitive of that cultural time period, So then the next question is, how did this change the art collection approach of modern collectors? So also from the documentary, they state that the idea that art morally improves you, and of course rich people are super into that, but it also caused more people, like, with a lot of money to give money to museums for them to happen. And so this also connects to Alfred Barr and how he contributed to this. And pretty much Alfred Barr, this guy persuaded, and this is from the documentary too, persuaded growing circle of millionaires to underwrite a museum that would treat modernism as a historical fact, as the culture of their time. And he would make a synoptic the museum that would make a synoptic collection of modern art, all schools of all nations, not just like specific groups, as they talk about, like in Europe, where they really only stuck, like if you were in a French museum, it would be like the French circle that's being showed there, not just every single nation. So kind of like globalized art, it was showing everything, and this was all kind of Alfred Barr's idea, and to showcase modern art, not just, as the nation, but as like a legit thing, a section of art, and like the avant-garde and all of that. And then finally, how did this shape MoMA? Well, clearly that's what MoMA ended up being, was primarily modern art and showing this off, and that's all connected with Alfred Barr. And again, I'm going to get into him a little bit more, but I just want to answer all these questions first. And then the last question, how is this exemplified by the National Gallery? And so the National Gallery, this was like a new building that they made, which was like the modern wing, kind of, I guess you'd call it. But it's like this very interesting looking building with a lot of cool architecture on top of it. But it's like there's different exhibits in each corner. It's like this whole way to get around, like even like the escalator looks cool. So it's almost like it's more of an experience, but it goes back to that beginning of the documentary when they talk about how people plan to go to these museums. And, if you really think about it, like the National Gallery, that is a remote location, and a lot of the art there is not just like the art, but it's also the building itself. It's pretty cool looking. But they say in the documentary, you already say yes to it before you even see it, because you're making a plan to go there. And I thought that was very, very interesting to look at a museum like that you're already saying yes to the art, that you approve of it, whatever, because you're going to go to it, if that makes sense. So now that I've very, very quickly answered all of those questions, I am going to talk a little bit more about Alfred Barr and MoMA and all of that. So why I think Alfred Barr is so interesting is because it seems like he was a formalist, and so he did not necessarily care about maybe what the painting is saying, but how it visually appeals to you. And I think that's interesting because I think a lot of artists would agree. I remember when I took a black and white photography class in high school, that interpreting a piece of art, it's going to change from person to person, and it doesn't matter what you as the artist interpret it to be. How other people react to it is cool too. So it doesn't have to be like a story being told. It could just be visually appealing, and whatever you feel about it is your own thing. It doesn't have to be, when you look at it, you're like, oh, that's a political piece, it's only a political piece, blah blah blah, whatever. So from theartstory.org, and I love the art story, so their little page on Alfred Barr, it states that he captivated the cutting edge, and I'm quoting this, the cutting edge modern art and grounded in classical connoisseurship. Art historian Alfred Barr shaped the way that generations of artists and art historians studied modern European and American art. Appointed the first director of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City in 1929, the young Barr promoted the art of modernists like Van Gogh, Paul Gauguin, and it's so hard for me to say that, Matisse and Cézanne, creating a canon of modern art still largely adhered to today, and his retrospectives of Van Gogh and Picasso helped to perpetuate the legendary artistic myths that remain in the public imagination to this day. In his attempt to educate the public about modern art, his formalist approach was an effort to help the viewer see and understand the new art that tended to deviate from traditional naturalism. His formalism would be consequential for subsequent critics, most famously Clement Greenberg, and also drew criticism from more socially minded critics. It has only been in recent years that the Museum of Modern Art has come to revisit Barr's schematic, diversifying and complicating Barr's original vision. So what I think is so interesting about Barr, the fact that they mention that he promoted the art of modernists Van Gogh, Matisse, Cézanne, Gauguin, the fact that he did that, to me, like, the fact that he's the reason why Van Gogh and Picasso are, like, more, I guess, humanized is very interesting, in the way that he was able to just exemplify that, to celebrate this type of art. And I think that's not really something we very much saw in the art world, if we're looking at it as a world, not just to the specific country where the art is coming from. The fact that we're taking from nations all over the place, and they're all shown here. Like, we know Van Gogh, he was Dutch, and we know, well, I can't remember where the other guys are from. I'm pretty sure Cézanne is a French guy. I could be wrong. Either way, these are people from all over the place, and they're being shown in America. So it's the way that we can combine all these different types of art together and show it together and appreciate it for what it is. And we don't have to look at it in the light of historical context all the time, even if that's kind of fun to do, And so I think that it very much revolutionized modern art and how it's presented, and it revolutionized museums. I mean, years ago, like when we have Da Vinci and all them, they're painting scenes from the Bible, they're painting scenes from, or, we're painting portraits of the French aristocrats, that's a story to it, right? But when you look at a painting, if we're thinking of Jackson Pollock, that's completely different. It's looking at it, and you have to kind of just appreciate it for what it is. And you can interpret it if you want, but you could also just enjoy looking at it. And I guess that's something that it's hard to think about now, years later, when modern art is like super celebrated, super cool, everybody loves it, to see it as that it's something that people didn't really do before. There always had to be a meaning, but it doesn't always have to. It could just be like a really good looking piece of art. And so I think that's why it's so important that Alfred Barr did that, but it also did change museums so very much, because it changed what they chose to have in their collection, as well as how they decided to present it. So what is also interesting that I'd like to talk about is the idea of modern art and modernism. So when I took History 102 with Dr. Foytek, one of the first things she asked us to do is define modernism. And that's like incredibly hard to do, because no matter what period of time you're living in, that moment is the most modern it has ever been. So putting something down as modernism, how can you do that? I mean, I could say that like a picture of a stick figure I drew today is modernism. I wouldn't be wrong, right? I hope I wouldn't be. But I wanted to talk about that a little bit more, and I went to another page on the art story. Again, I love them. I think they're awesome. And this is the page on the Museum of Modern Art. And as I quote, they state, since its inception in 1929, the Museum of Modern Art has continually redefined the idea of museum in contemporary Western culture. Originally conceived by its founders as a place for modern art to come and go, since what makes up modernism is constantly changing, as I said, MoMA only established a permanent collection in 1952, but it has become the home for some of the greatest works of avant-garde painting, sculpture, film, and multimedia art in the world. Shaped by the founding mission to educate the public about modern art, MoMA's guiding principles were further honed by the inaugural director, Alfred Barr, who saw the museum as a laboratory exploring various branches of artistic production. MoMA's collection continues to expand as it embraces installation, conceptual performance, and video art as well. In an increasingly globalized world, MoMA has made attempts to diversify its collection and tell new stories of modern art. So I think that's pretty cool, because I think we could look at modern art as like cultural, and as they say this in the film, cultural facts, and it's definitive of how we view the world itself. But it's basically what MoMA was able to do, in part because of Alfred Barr, but also because of all those rich donors at the same time, was look at modern art as a serious thing and look at it as high art. And granted, I feel like Impressionism, maybe it's because it's been years after it happened, but I see Impressionism already as high art instantly, like I already know that. But I could see why people would not see Andy Warhol's Brillo box as high art. Even though I see it as that, I can understand why. But I think creating a museum specifically for modern art really helped to engage the public and teach them about it. And I love that the whole reason of MoMA was to educate the public about it. And that's a very interesting thing, to not just have a museum to look at things and be like, oh yeah, that's Marie Antoinette. No, it's why was, like, what is this? What is this section of art? What is this? Like, if you talked about Fauvism or Dadaism, whatever, all of that stuff, Cubism, and to kind of just look at it and see how different artists did different things, instead of prior it all being like very realistic images of Jesus, so I think that pretty much is everything that America did with its further expansion of museums, and the fact that it was globalized. That's so cool. You could see something from the other side of the world in this museum in America, and I think that is pretty neat. But that's pretty much all I have for today. Thank you for watching, and please wash your hands. Thanks.